What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I'm once again going to be back on Motorfest, most likely asking some of the more difficult questions, which I have to admit pretty much everybody most likely is at this point. But you guys want to know what I have been wondering? Can Motorfest go 5 years like the Crew 2, or at least can it last 5 years on the current timeline of updates it's had so far? Now, one of the big reasons why I am asking this question, though, is I do feel like to a certain extent, if you are looking at the main timelines of the Crew 2, or at least looking at the timeline of Motorfest, which I did end up actually doing a video on that because I was also interested in it. When looking at this, though, guys, you really are looking at Motorfest like, okay, so we're 8 months in, we've had a few updates here and there, but they really haven't added that much stuff for a lot of big updates, which is probably giving a lot of players a sense, including myself, that maybe they have something big planned, at least we are hoping for that matter. But if you are looking at the main updates in this game around the 8 or so months it has been out, it really does make you go, you know what? Is this game really going to be a 5-year game like the Crew 2, or is it most likely going to fall behind a bit, maybe last a year or two, and they're going to scrap it, and then immediately start working on the next Crew game? That is something I keep asking myself, which I do feel like a lot of people are also doing that. But the reason why I did want to mention this, though, is if you look at something like the Crew 2, guys, seriously, that had a lot of updates when it came out. Don't get me wrong, I do know that game had its problems. But the difference in the Crew 2, though, as I did mention in that timeline video as well, the updates were actually a lot bigger in that game, and they also added a lot more stuff to them, which I would say in return, a lot of people are like, wait a second, we got Demolition Derby, all kinds of new events for Alpha GP, and all kinds of new stuff you can do. Then they also ended up adding summits into one of the updates, which I would say is going to be a fairly large update, having an entirely new game mode that everybody can play, and it's most likely going to have new rewards, new unlocks, and all kinds of new stuff in it. That's a pretty big update, man, coming out within around 7 to 8 months of that game being out, which I would say currently in Motorfest, guys, have we had a big update? Have they added anything besides a playlist? I'm just being honest here. I'm not hating or complaining on it, but I do feel like a lot of players are wondering the same thing. Let me ask you guys this real fast. I do know some people might be like, you know what, Block, stop complaining, but seriously though, hear me out for a second, guys. What if we keep getting around one playlist every 3 months for the next year? Would you keep playing Motorfest? Seriously, I do want to know your thoughts on that. I would almost guarantee that most people are going to agree that one playlist every 3 to 4 months is just not enough for an update, man. It just isn't. Don't get me wrong, I do know they add different themed summits, but honestly, the summits are not going to hold it together enough to where if we actually had more PvP events even 8 months in, we still have not gotten a single PvP upgrade, which I'm hoping we actually get an upgraded PvP system, hopefully coming soon, maybe in Season 4, but again, no one knows anything because we haven't heard anything about sneak peeks about any of the updates, so it's probably going to be stuck in the air, kind of like I am right now. And on top of that, though, the other thing I was thinking about here is if you think about this about the Crew 2, that also got a PvP live battle update. I think it was in the second or third one that did end up adding PvP into the game with different stuff. So that's a huge thing, man. They were adding big stuff on top of PvP updates. They were also adding different things like new classes like Demolition Derby or the hovercrafts. Don't get me wrong, I do know people probably didn't like them, but the way I'm looking at that though is the hovercrafts are like the Demolition Derby are going to be a brand new class bringing brand new vehicles into the game, and a quick example of this is going to be the King of Mayhem DLC that did end up coming out in December. This not only brought the Demolition Derby discipline, but it also brought live PvP game modes, new vehicles, and races and skills into the game. For example, guys, looking at this DLC, then looking at the Season 2 of Motorfest, you're probably like, okay, so there is going to be some new content there, but why are the updates on the Crew 2 seeming to be a lot bigger but have a lot more stuff in there? I do understand to a certain extent they probably did that to bring that game up, or that was going to be the new open world racing game or whatever. But you know what's odd? Motorfest is also going to be the new racing game and also the face of the franchise, at least now it is. So my big question is though is Motorfest really going to last with the way they're updating it? We can all agree right now, guys, I hate to say this, but we can definitely say the player base has been bleeding pretty much every single day since the game has come out. For example, looking at the summit right now or looking at last week's summit, there's around 70 or 75,000 people in the summit. And some people might go, well, that's a lot of players still doing it. It is, but here's the thing. That's only going to be all the platforms. So think about that for a second. And if you go back on the Crew 2, it's actually going to have 40 to 60,000 on just PlayStation. So you can probably see how much bigger the player base is on the Crew 2, even with Motorfest being out, guys. Like, I find it kind of insane that there is still going to be a pretty populated player base there in the Crew 2, while Motorfest is kind of dwindling down a bit, which I would say comes down to a lot of factors that I probably could get into a different video. And you know what's funny about this, though, is I would almost guarantee I'm probably not the only person thinking about this. Like, when looking at Motorfest, guys, a lot of players are like, wait a second, this game is going to go 5 years? Like, I almost feel like in some ways Ubisoft's probably like, yo, is this game going to be a flop? Like, should we make it last a year or two, then basically cancel it? And then after that, they're basically going to be working on the next Crew game, which, to be honest, guys, there's probably a pretty high chance they are working on it. Like, not even going to lie, the Crew 3 is probably going to be a thing. I'm going to say it right now. You can come back to this video in a certain amount of time. It's most likely going to come out in the future. I'm going to call it right now, because we all do know right now, guys, don't get me wrong here, by the way. There's something I want to say. Motorfest can easily turn around from this. Like, yes, the game looking like a flop at the moment. Can it be? Of course not, man. They can actually turn this game around with a huge update by probably putting in something like a brand new PvP system, and who knows, maybe even a ranked PvP system. On top of that, guys, they can maybe redo the entire summon, maybe overhaul it. That way it's probably going to be a new experience instead of copying the same one from the Crew 2, or at least a worse version of it for that matter. Maybe add some new events, maybe a new vehicle class, which is probably not going to happen. The other big thing, a map expansion, so we have more skills and new events around the map to actually do. Now, the other flip side of that is, yes, that would probably turn the game around and make it so much better if they keep going down the path currently and most likely adding one playlist every 3 months. I don't want to say this though, guys, but this game is not even going to last 2 years. It won't. It might maybe last a year and a half, but then the entire game is probably going to flop or cancel. Then they're most likely going to start working on the Crew 3 even more, and then probably release that game in like 2 or 3 years from now, and it's probably going to be the new Crew game of like the entire franchise. Even though the worst part of that though is Ubisoft's reputation by then is probably not going to be in a great place, so a lot of players might not even buy the game because of that entire thing that happened with, like, well, Motorfest being canceled if it was, or the entire game turned into a flop because they're not even like updating it properly. Whereas like something like the Crew 2 was going to get massive updates all the time, even getting huge updates while Motorfest was out. I could not believe they actually did that. That was really confusing on a marketing standpoint. But the other thing about that though is if they were to do that, then we also had the Crew 1 that also was completely removed, which we do know the Crew 2 is probably going to follow suit. So does that mean the next Crew game is going to be a brand new game to where you have to start all over? It really does raise a lot of questions, man, because this game, you know, Motorfest, was going to be an added-on version of the Crew 2, or like a brand new game that built off from that one. So if they were to make a Crew 3, it's probably going to be a brand new title, or is it going to branch off of Motorfest? Like, that's a lot of questions, and if I'm being real, guys, I do not want to see Motorfest fail, man. Like, seeing this game flop or something, like, if we keep getting these small updates all the way up until the end of the year, like, you know, maybe the 1-year anniversary of this game, we get a crazy update. It could happen. Like, I'm not saying it couldn't. In fact, I probably think they have something huge planned. I really think they do, because if they don't, I know for a fact they also probably believe this game is not going to make it very long if they don't do it. So I'm going to guess here and say they are aware of it, and they do know they probably have to do something drastic to save it, or this game is most likely not going to make it past a year and a half or even a year, because as at this point right now, guys, I really don't see this game making it to 5 years. Like, I really don't. But I guess the best way to end this, though, is going to come down to a simple question. Do you guys think the Crew Motorfest is going to last 5 years, like the Crew 2?